Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather on this 23rd of January. Thank you for joining us tonight from your part of Alaska. We encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily at 1-800-472-0391. That, of course, is our Alaska Weather Information line. You can find all of that information on the phone and also on our webpage, weather.gov/Alaska, or start closer to your weather forecast office that serves the interior and the west at weather.gov/Fairbanks, or South Central, Southwest, and Prince William Sound at weather.gov/Anchorage, or all of Southeast, all the way up to Yakutat and just about to Cordova. That, of course, at weather.gov/Juneau. If you'd like to check on ice thickness, snowfall information, and, of course, your area rivers, you can do that at weather.gov/APRFC, which is short for the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center. You can always get the latest information and warnings and any information about local earthquakes at tsunami.gov. And, of course, a whole lot more just by going to that page you see on your screen. If you have questions, please let me know. Happy to serve you any way I possibly can. And if you have questions, comments, or concerns about what you're watching on Alaska Weather here tonight, please do let me know. And you can also find this information on our website there. All of these graphics are available every night around 5 o'clock or so. And, you know, if you email me, send me a picture from where you're emailing from. Love to see what it looks like in your neck of the woods there. And this is the Bering Strait and sea ice you see here in the foreground. And way out across the water that's frozen up right there is Russia, the Chukchi Peninsula, as seen looking north and west from our friends in Gamble. Richard there, working at the airport, sent this to us today. Thank you so much, Richard. We appreciate that. Love to see what it looks like from your part of St. Lawrence Island. And yeah, it looks like you got plenty of ice out there. We'll take a look at the ice forecast and analysis here coming up in just a little bit when Eric joins us for the marine segment a little bit later on in the afternoon. Let's take a look at what we're seeing out there across northern parts of Southeast tonight. It's still snowing. We were talking about winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories yesterday. We're still doing that. It still looks like winter weather is moving into Haines and Skagway and the Klondike Highway all the way up toward White Pass, and around Skagway and that area there in the winter storm warning. You could see as much as 10 to 17 inches of snow in the next 24 hours. So certainly looks like winter is going to make a strong push through the Lynn Canal there. Just to the south, as we get into tomorrow, it looks like we'll see a chance for accumulating snow around Juneau as well, maybe as much as 3 to 5 inches of snow. Certainly not the amount that we're talking up north here in the Lynn Canal, but in this general area, it does look like it is going to snow, and in some cases, snow to beat the band. So plan on some wet and sloppy weather, not just really for today, but as we go through the weekend, this area of low pressure that's doing the snow machine right here across northern and southeast isn't going anywhere. So plan on continued slop and continued snow in northern parts of southeast, and every time we reach that criteria where it's going to be an uncomfortable or perhaps maybe even dangerous amount of snow, there'll be a warning or an advisory out for that level and that information there. So watch our friends in weather.gov/Juneau and, of course, at NWS Juneau on Facebook and on Twitter, and they'll continue to have some really useful information there if you've got any plans to move in and around Haines, Skagway, the highway, or down toward Juneau on the road system there. So, again, tricky conditions are coming up. Up north into the Deltana and Tanana Flats region and out toward Healy, especially south of the Denali Park Service entrance there. It's going to be cold. Wind chill values there are 45 below or more as we go through the next 24 hours there, thanks to the wind pushing through. And we're going to see similar conditions here all the way across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, from Arctic Village out toward Ambler and Bettles, and also across the Kobuk and Noatak Valley out toward Point Hope and down almost to Kotzebue. Across the Seward Peninsula to Shishmaref, in the interior especially, again, we're looking at wind chill values that are 45 below or even colder at times. And then across southwest, same problem there. Wind moving through an Arctic air mass is going to make it bitter cold. And once again, it's important to remember that exposure up to about 10 minutes or so, maybe even less depending on how cold it is, could result in frostbite. So reduce your exposure to outside, and this is going on. But it's also important to have a plan when you're traveling. And this is true any time of the year in Alaska, but especially when it's cold like this. Make sure someone knows that you're coming there. Make sure that they know that you've left. And make sure that you've got enough supplies in case you get stuck. If you're going across terrain there on your snow machine and something breaks down, make sure someone knows that you need to be found. And you got to do that, and the only way to do that is by letting someone know what your plan is before you're coming or going, okay? So, winter weather advisory, or I'm sorry, wind chill advisories for all the areas in yellow for the next 24 hours there because it is cold and because of the wind is moving through. Also, it's wintertime, so it should be kind of a known thing, right? Hey, today is the anniversary of the coldest temperature recorded in Alaska. That was at Prospect Creek 49 years ago today, so interesting stuff there. This was part of the Alyeska pipeline, the building of the oil pipeline here through Alaska. The camp was located way out in the valley where they recorded this, so this was at Prospect Creek, and the temperature plummeted to minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit along that construction camp there during the building of the pipeline. So pipeline there, at least part of it, 49 years old today. That was in Prospect Creek, and minus 80, coldest temperature ever recorded in Alaska. Of course, there's probably some tales of it being even colder in your part of Alaska there. Yeah, let me know. Let me know what that story is. As we take a look at the satellite picture here, you can see low pressure parked up here across the northern parts of the Gulf. That's bringing in warm and wet air in through southeastern Alaska. But remember, we have a tremendous amount of cold trying to sneak into the northern sections of southeast and all of south central and southwest for that matter. And then we have a storm force low here across the central and western chain. It's really kind of pretty, a very nice delineated area of low pressure working its way up towards Shemya and Attu and west of Adak as that front is working north and east. This is really going to fall apart because high pressure here all across the interior and the west is so stable, so tough, that is not going to work its way through here. So as that works its way north and west, it's really going to start to fall apart. It will be replaced by another low as that happens in the next 24 to 36 hours. In the meantime, little waves are coming in across the backside of southwest and in through south central Kodiak Island. You're probably going to get the winds and clouds changing around a little bit. But this area here across the northern Gulf is really going to be the predominant region of unsettled weather across Alaska, probably for the next week. That's a long time to say that, but this high pressure system is not moving. And that means if anything's going to change, it's going to have to change over here, and that's where this weather is really going to stay, it looks like, for the next week. So, a 986 millibar low there parked across northern parts of the Gulf. That means sloppy weather for a good chunk of southeast for the next week, and probably northern parts of southeast are looking at continued waves of snow moving through. One of those cranking up tonight across the Lynn Canal. Winter storm warning there for Haines, Skagway, White Pass, Klondike Highway, you know the drill, 10 to 17 inches there in that region. South of that, though, a little bit sloppier, and tomorrow it looks like, or late tonight really, but into tomorrow, a winter weather advisory for Juneau, maybe 3 to 5. High pressure up across the northwestern parts of Alaska at 1,017 millibars, pushing that cold air in from the Arctic and all across west and southwestern Alaska. Wind chill advisories there. Anytime that wind picks up, the temperature is just going to feel like it dropped a good 20 to 30 degrees. Here's our storm force low out here across the west as it expands and moves north and west tonight. It drops to 965. Most of the stronger winds here across the central and western chain on the northern edge of that, and maybe clipping into Nikolsky. You might get a little bit of a rain and snow mix there, and certainly a little bit of wind. Clear, dry sky across the west, but boy is it cold, and you might see a little bit of snow across the Alcan border, generally south of Eagle. As we get into Friday, really not much of a chance for accumulating snow for most parts of the interior or the west. We still have our low pressure system out in the west, drawing in that south and easterly flow, but this is all cold, and that ice is advancing southward there. So if you've got friends working the crabs out there across the Bering, make sure you let them know. Ice is on the move, and once again, Eric will have an update for us on that here in just a few minutes. Low pressure across the northern Gulf at 986 millibars. That's going to try and push snow closer to Prince William Sound, maybe sneaking a little bit into Kodiak, but really the focus for low pressure and snow is going to be right here across northern southeast. Southern parts of southeast, Petersburg, Craig, Klawock, you're all looking at a better chance of rain. But once you get north of Gustavus and north of Juneau, it really does look like a lock for snow. As we get into Saturday, look, nothing moved here. The front's moved position a little bit, but we're still looking at that Arctic front dropping south into northern parts of southeast. We still have a sloppy pattern here across the Panhandle, and we still have low pressure. That might even back up enough to push some of that snow into parts of north and eastern sections of the Kodiak archipelago. So Kodiak, maybe out toward Raspberry Island, a little bit of snow, and perhaps some snow into Prince William Sound. But mostly it's just going to be cold, bitter cold, with a high pressure up around 1,040 millibars on the north slope. So what does that look like where you are? In southeast, temps above freezing for the most part. Up toward Yakutat, though, 25, 10 in Cordova, 7 below for the Matanuska Valley, out toward Palmer, down to Kenai, Homer, 1 degree. 14 below in Fairbanks, anywhere from 20 to 30 below across the interior. Look at Galena, 30 below there, 10 below in Nome, 17 below for Utqiagvik, 5 below for St. Lawrence Island, and Gamble there, again, helping to build the ice there for Richard. 16 degrees around St. Paul and the central and western chain in the 20s and 30s. Sandpoint down to 15 for a high temperature tomorrow, 18 in Kodiak. Haines and Skagway hovering close to freezing, almost 40 around Ketchikan and Annette. 5 below for Yukon. Fairbanks looking at about 9 below, South Central in the single digits, 10 to 20 below for the North Slope, and overnight lows, bitter cold on Saturday morning, 20 to 35 below across the north and western interior, and high temperatures barely recover in the afternoon.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look at the aviation weather starting with Friday morning. With the low pressure system out in the Aleutians and near southeast Alaska, we're going to be seeing low clouds and visibilities there. Weak frontal boundary along the interior will bring low clouds and ceilings up that way. And again, weak system moving across the North Slope will also bring down visibilities and clouds in that region. With IFR to conditions over southeast, portions of the Aleutians, eastern interior, and the North Slope, this pattern looks to be very similar over the next 2 days, as we'll see here in a second. Friday afternoon, maybe somewhat improving conditions in southeast, but again, that area in the interior, eastern interior continues, and again along the North Slope and down through the Alaska Peninsula and out into the Aleutians. Saturday morning, again, system will remain hanging in there, weakening, but marginal conditions over much of the coastal areas of the Gulf, down through the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula and into the Aleutians, eastern interior, and along the North Slope. And Saturday afternoon, again, marginal to IFR conditions over much of the coastal areas and into southeast, interior, eastern interior, and along North Slope and down through the Aleutians and out into the Bering Sea. Past conditions for the Brooks Range area, we're going to be looking at marginal to decreasing IFR conditions there with that cloudiness, especially on the north entrance. And again, much as similar, marginal to IFR. Friday for Lake Clark, Merrill, looks like VFR conditions there. And rainy, marginal. Windy, marginal to decreasing to IFR conditions. Isabel, IFR conditions throughout the day. And Testa, marginal to IFR conditions through the day. And Tanita, looking at IFR to marginal conditions, slightly improving during the day there. And Portage, VFR conditions out in Prince William Sound. For the past conditions in southeast, for Chilkoot and White Pass, IFR conditions. And freezing levels for Friday morning. Of interest is southeast Alaska with elevated freezing levels across the southern part of the southeast up to 2,000 feet. Otherwise, the surface moves out from southeast Alaska out into the Gulf and out through the Aleutians and into the Bering Sea. Icing conditions, we're going to be looking at below 5,000 feet in portions of southeast Alaska, with coastal mountains below 5,000 feet, and then also across much of the Canadian region, and coastal areas in the North Gulf below 6,000 feet there. Otherwise, most of the mainland looks good. And the Aleutians below 9,000 feet for Friday. Jet stream, strong jet across the Pacific there with 150 knot jet at 30,000 feet. Otherwise, big ridge over the Bering with on the front side of the ridge, 80 knot winds coming down the west coast of Alaska with an 80 knot jet moving through portions of Canada there, moving down to 9,000 feet, counterclockwise circulation there in the North Gulf, with again 50 knot winds through the Alaska Alaska Range down through the northern part of the Alaska Peninsula. Big ridge out there with 25 knots and 50 knots on the west side of that ridge. Otherwise, there's a big low out in the Aleutians. And for 9,000 feet, very similar conditions with the low in the Gulf. Again, it's pretty strong winds through much of the Alaska Range and through southeast with 20 to 25 knots there. And ridge of high pressure over the Bering, 35 knot winds across the North Slope, and again that big low out in the Aleutians. For turbulence, how does those winds translate into turbulence? We're going to be looking at consider isolated severe over portions of the Alaska Range with those stronger winds around that low pressure system and into Cook Inlet below 4,000 feet here, below 6,000 feet as you get closer to the Alaska Peninsula, and below 4,000 feet as you get onto the YK Delta, and below 4,000 feet as you move out into the Aleutians. This has been Eric Holloway with the National Weather Service.
Orion is the unmistakable king of the winter constellations. He's only visible during winter, though, because he's located on the other side of the sun the rest of the year. With this week's new moon, he should be easy to spot. If you face southeast any night this week, there he is, Orion in all his belted glory. Look for the 3 stars in a row signifying his belt, plus 2 shoulder stars and 2 leg stars. But the interesting thing about any of our constellations is that they only really exist from our perspective. If you sailed far from our solar system, eventually our constellations would distort and become unrecognizable. All of the stars are different distances away from us, so let's look at Orion from a different perspective. If we leave Earth faster than the speed of light, we can come around to the side of him, and the shape is all changed. Even his belt stars are spread out. It's a whole new constellation from a whole new perspective. Keep looking up.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and we have a special guest in the studio today. We welcome Amanda Terborg of the Aviation Weather Center. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Amanda's flown in all the way from Kansas City, and for those of you that don't know, the Aviation Weather Center serves the lower 48 for aviators, just as the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit here in Anchorage serves all of Alaska. So I kind of wonder, what's the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City doing to help out Alaska, Amanda?
Yeah, you know, we do a lot of collaboration work with our sister station up here. Lately, we've been doing a lot of work, especially in the satellite meteorology.
Okay.
In particular, we have been looking at ways to better identify icing conditions in clouds, which is a big deal up here because, as I'm coming to find out, even though I'm not from here, you guys have a lot of pilots here.
We have a lot of pilots. In
Yeah.
fact, it's, when you say you can't get there from here, that's how you get there.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so with icing potential then, what's Kansas City working on?
Well, we are working on something that will help us, again, identify the icing in the clouds. You don't want ice on your aircraft.
No.
Not only does it add a whole bunch of extra weight to your airframe when it attaches to the wings and the nose cone, but it can also mess with your aerodynamics.
Right.
And in the most serious conditions, that can mess with it enough that you can actually crash.
It changes the shape of the wing, and that makes it sometimes impossible to fly, right?
It does, yeah. So we want to figure out a way to better forecast for that.
Makes sense.
Now this particular image is over Alaska. The colors here are a little goofy. It doesn't look like your run-of-the-mill satellite image.
Okay.
But the red is where you have liquid clouds and the blue is ice. But again, it really doesn't tell you a lot where you have icing conditions in that cloud. Because in those clouds there's little droplets and they're cold and they're actually below freezing, but they're still liquid. And that makes them sticky.
Okay.
So when an aircraft flies through there, those droplets are sticking to the aircraft and it can happen amazingly fast.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to find. And there is a product called the Aircraft Flight Icing Threat that does this. And it's basically looking at the temperature of the cloud, and it's also looking at the size of the droplets to identify a probability and intensity of those icing conditions.
Okay.
And if you flip to the next image, this is a case from Juneau, Alaska, where this probably wouldn't have been the best day to fly around Juneau.
Okay.
Now there was an area of moisture that pushed south from the southwest up along the coast that pushed in a stratus layer. And in the stratus layer there was a lot of those super cooled liquid drops or a lot of stickiness.
Okay.
And So the flight icing threat was able to, in the pinks and the reds there, was able to identify where that icing was. Now this is really cool. You know, it's really cool to be able to identify that. There is, you know, of course, caveats to every product. Much as we wish it would happen, sun doesn't shine all the time, unless, I guess, if you live in northern Alaska during the summertime.
Right.
But we need that sun to be able to bounce off those clouds and to be able to see where those super cool drops are.
Okay, so it's a daytime only tool.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right now, of course, you know, we're in the era of advanced satellite technology, and there is a satellite that can actually use moonlight to see clouds.
Yes.
And so sometime in the future, we hope to be able to do that.
Okay.
Another thing that is a bit of a challenge is multiple layers of clouds. You know, you can only see so far through a thick cloud.
Okay.
And if it's thick enough, sometimes you can't see a layer of icing that's below there.
Right.
But even besides those caveats, this product has a lot of potential to help out Alaskan aviators here.
Well, it sounds like a really big deal, and something that forecasters at the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit could use probably on a daily basis, and especially in the middle of a really big storm.
Yeah, I would think so.
Do you have a really good success story in the lower 48 using this tool?
You know, it's a fairly new product, and so we're still evaluating it. But yeah, we have had a lot of cases where we have seen that it does tend to capture those icing conditions.
Okay, very good. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for sharing some of the very interesting satellite imagery and the tools that you're using there at the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City with us here in Alaska. People can probably find some of this information online, right?
Yeah, here is a website here. It's a page from NASA Langley, and they have this imagery as well as a bunch of other satellite imagery that you can take a look at.
Okay, great. And I'm sure our friends at the Alaska Aviation Weather Center and the unit will be using that in the coming months there with your training and your help there to learn more about that tool to help Alaska aviators any day of the year. That's wonderful stuff. So thanks again for joining us, Amanda, and we welcome you to view any of our Alaska weather facts on YouTube anytime at the address below, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the marine forecast. Let's take a look at the ice edge analysis today. You can see that pack ice is slowly going to continue to move south. We expect that to continue here the next couple of days with strong northerly cold air. And we also analyzed pack ice through Bristol Bay and into Cook Inlet. The sea ice analysis forecaster wanted me to let people know that they might see some pack ice moving out through here through Shelkoff Strait. Marine forecast for southeast, we're looking at generally southerly winds, 15 to 25 knots in the inside waters. Outside water is going to be generally from the southwest at 15 to 20, with seas as high as 12 feet. And Saturday, marine forecast generally from the southwest at 15 knots inside waters. Outside water is going to be generally from a southerly direction, 20 to 25 knots, seas as high as 11 feet. And south central on Friday, we're going to be looking at winds generally from a northerly direction, 25 to 40 knots, gusts as high as 40 here near Cordova. Otherwise, Cook Inlet region winds generally out of a northerly direction, 25 knots over the northern and central part of that. Basin with seas is approaching storm force there near Kamishak Bay, seas as high as 18 feet. For Saturday, again, northerly winds, 20 to 30 knots. As you get closer to the Barren Islands, winds generally from a northwest at 30 to 35 knots, seas as high as 12 feet on the other side of the Barren Islands. Otherwise, through the rest of the Cook Inlet, northerly 15 to 25 knots. For Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, winds generally from a northwesterly direction around Kodiak Island, 30 to 40 knots with seas as high as 14 feet with gusts to 60 here. Otherwise, on the south side of the peninsula, 35 knots, generally from a northerly direction, 25 knots there on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula. For Saturday, again, northerly winds, 20 to 35 knots around Kodiak Island. South side of the peninsula, northerly again, 25 to 30. On either side of the peninsula there, and Bristol Bay, northerly at 30 knots. For Aleutian Chain, winds generally from an easterly direction, 30 to 40 knots, 30 to 45 knots there. Seas as high as 23 feet on the south side. On the western side of the Aleutian Chain, winds generally from a southwest at 40 to 45 knots, seas as high as 28 feet out there near Shimia. For Saturday, looking at, again, winds from the east at 25 to 30 knots across much of the region, more southerly direction as you head out towards the western end of the Aleutians. For West Coast, we're looking at generally winds along the pack ice, winds from the north at 15 to 25 knots. Out ahead of that pack ice, winds generally from a easterly direction, 25 to 30 knots, seas as high as 17 feet there near St. Matthew Island. For Saturday, looking at winds generally from the north, continuing 15 to 30 knots across much of the region outside of along the head of the pack ice. Winds generally from the east at 25 to 30 knots, seas as high as 16 feet. For the Arctic coast, looking at winds generally from the west at 15 to 20 knots, and down through the northwest coast and through Bering Strait, winds generally from a northerly or westerly direction, 15 to 20 knots. And for Saturday, Arctic coast, we're looking at winds from the west at 15 to 20 knots, and down through the northwest and through the Bering Strait, generally from the north at 20 to 25 knots there. For tonight's weather, we're going to be looking at a complex low near the coastal area with an occluded front out ahead of that. Surface low with a warm front moving through southeast, good snow showers through much of the northern part of the panhandle and in through the interior with a weak trough through the eastern interior. High pressure remains over much of the northwest, and again that big low pressure system out there in the Aleutians. For Friday's weather, again that low stays pretty close to the northern part of the Gulf with stationary fronts and troughs moving through much of the area. Otherwise, big high pressure and another low out, again that low out in the Aleutians.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.